guys, welcome back to the channel and hanging out. As Jen put out on her Twitter recently, she hasn't been doing quite so well health-wise as of late. Lots of tests and stuff that are going on, so looks like y'all are stuck with me for another solo stream. I apologize that the audio quality went down to the way it was before I got my new equipment. My back's been kind of bad the last couple of days, and so I'm streaming from my room, which sucks a little bit, but I'm doing my best to make it work. So let me know if it's too terrible. It's still a Blue Yeti, so it's not the worst thing on the planet, but thank you so much, Ikeda, for the well wishes for Jen. I'll let her know. So I put out a vote in the community about whether or not we should do a 5K Q&A, which I still need to do, or whether I should do a stream on food, cooking, being a vegetarian who's gluten-free and, like, you know, actually not drowning in the weight of the expense of feeding that. And apparently folks really like the food modeling that I like to put up in the server, so I guess we're doing food. Thanks that Kitty's Karcher was peaceful. Hydace did indeed receive her gently. Yeah, Ikeda recently lost his kitty. My condolences, and I hope that Hydace and Persephone did receive her gently. So, let's begin at the beginning. Food on a budget. This stream is going to assume that you are most likely living on your own and responsible for providing most of your own food. I'm also going to be covering later in the stream things like low spoon meals. So for those of you who are not familiar with spoon theory is basically for those of us with mental or physical disabilities. I don't technically have a physical disability, but I do have chronic pain, and that can count. Basically the amount of energy you have for the day can be measured in the number of spoons you have, right? And different tasks cost different number of spoons. So you might start with, on a good day, you might start with 10 spoons, right? But like taking a shower might cost a whole damn spoon because your back hurts really bad. Being upright for that long sucks. So that kind of thing, right? And I'll be talking a little bit about what I do on bad days for folks that struggle with that. I will also be talking a little bit about, you know, organizing around particularly executive dysfunction, because I have ADHD and I cook for my whole household. So organizing around that particular thing can be a little bit of a struggle, and being on point can be a little bit of a struggle. So we'll be talking a little bit about that and the ways that I work around that, shopping around that. We'll be talking about the food costs in different places, because what's cheap up here might not be as cheap for you, right? Like in some places, for example, fruits and veggies are significantly more expensive than they are in certain areas of the US. So shopping around what is available in your local area for like fairly cheap, that will be one of the things that we're going to cover. So if you guys have questions, you don't have to super chat. I'm obviously going to prioritize super chats like I always do, but I will engage with the chat, especially because there's what, 50 of you? There's not a ton of folks. So if you have your own questions, chances are I'll probably get to them, whether you decide to super chat or not. There's never any pressure for that. But let me know what you're interested in, because I've got, for example, a whole bunch of appliances. I can talk about what's worth investing in and what's not, in terms of, you know, what things are more likely to be useful, especially for vegetarian cooking, because vegetarian cooking has a tendency to be more prep heavy than other kinds of cooking can be. I'll also talk about like what sort of processed foods are going to be more worth the money versus what things you should probably make yourself if you have time, and how to build these sort of systems in order to make cooking a little cheaper. So, David Lester, on a serious note, I would like to know how on earth to balance between keeping a pantry stock for a power outage versus having room in my pantry for normal life. I actually have a suggestion for that. One of the big things is to keep your emergency storage separate from your normal pantry storage. So what I like to do is I've got a little gas burner, and I've got some gas canisters, and I've also got dates and things. Keep a large tub somewhere, like if you've got garage space or in the back of a closet or something. Keep like non-perishable foods, things like dried beans, things like canned stuff. Replace them about every 6 months to a year for things that you use regularly. Have a list of recipes that you can easily cook on the gas burner, as long as you've got a safe place to cook with it. And make sure you've got enough for between 3 and 5 days is usually the length of time you'll actually need for most kinds of emergencies. If you've got an emergency going on longer than that, then you've got bigger problems than needing a pantry of food. It's usually not food that runs out first. It's usually other things that cause problems. But generally, it's good to have a number of recipes prepped and keep it in a separate storage. And once a year or so, swap out the regular stuff from your pantry with the newer things and use those things up that you would normally have. So you want to keep your canned goods, your dried goods, etc. You want to keep the emergency stores in a separate space. And make sure that there are things you normally cook with also, and that you know exactly what things go to what. So that is what I suggest. Yeah, like Orcus Noir talks about, like the 50-gallon containers, something like that. Just make sure you've got some kind of sheet somewhere that tells you when those foods expire so that you can replace them within a year of their expiration. That way you can still use them up. Gallons of distilled water is another good suggestion. But yeah, those are the suggestions that I've got. So hopefully that helps. I don't know if there's anything else. Like, do you have any clarifications that you'd like or anything else? Yeah, the freeze in Houston was, yeah, absolutely fucking terrifying. Like, I do not blame any of you that like bombarded your Congress people, especially your state Congress people. Remember, not your national ones, your state Congress people, with rage letters being like, yo, fix your shit, because that was messed up. I had friends out in Texas that were terrified. Like, I had one friend who had solar panels and stuff and was trying to keep their heater up, and yeah, we were scared for them. So let's go back to, all right, so I'm vegetarian. So I'm going to be, any tips that I give are going to be from this perspective. Now, I can talk a little bit about eating meat. I can talk a little bit about, we're going to be going over using leftovers in a frugal way, because some people cannot stand leftovers, but the system that I use relies heavily on them. There are what I call triplicate meals, which are, you cook sort of a base item. Back when I was not vegetarian, before my meat allergy got as bad as it is, and we actually found out that it was an allergy and not just like digestive problems, I used to do this thing where I would roast a whole chicken and we would eat the leg meat that night. And I would make chicken, we would eat the thigh and leg meat that night, and I would make chicken salad out of the breast meat. And I would take the bones and the skin and I would make a chicken stock, and I would take like remnants of the meat and I would make a chicken soup. And so that was 3 nights worth of dinners off of just the one roast. You could do something very similar with a large chunk of pot roast. You would like make the pot roast like a huge thing in like a slow cooker or something, cut a third of it off, eat that night, take a third of it and make beef stew with it the next night. And then take the other third and make stroganoff. So these are examples of various kinds of things where you can take a large base and make a whole bunch. Generally, I don't have to cook huge batches of things. There's only 3 of us in our household. So generally, most of the food that I make, if I double the recipe for a 4-portion meal, we'll still get enough for lunches for a few days. But there's also things like a vegetarian version of that is I make chili and chili mac. So making a big pot of chili, sometimes in my Instant Pot, sometimes in my slow cooker. And I keep a few cups of it, and the next night I make chili mac. And those 2 things, like, you're still using the leftovers up creatively, and you have leftover chili probably if you make a big pot, especially if you have an Instant Pot. Or any sort of pressure cooker. It doesn't have to be the brand name. It's just that there's a lot of recipes for the brand name one, so you know for a fact it's going to cook exactly the way you want it to. But chili and chili mac are extremely economical. Most chili is very, very cheap, especially if you don't throw a bunch of meat in it. Like dried beans, if you have a pressure cooker or a slow cooker, which those are two appliances that if you want to do frugal cooking, especially if you got a full-time job, those are going to be your two best fucking friends. Like 100% pressure cooker, slow cooker, and a high-speed blender. Those three things are things that are actually worth investing a little bit of money in to get a decent model because they're extremely useful. I will cook gigantic pots of various kinds of beans because we eat a lot of beans. We eat, especially black beans and white beans, we eat a ton of them. I will cook, 3 to 4 cups of beans at a time in my Instant Pot. I will freeze them in 1.5 cup portions, which is approximately how much a can of beans from the store would be. It would be, it's significantly cheaper to cook them from dried, and you don't even have to soak them if you have a pressure cooker. Like, it takes a little longer to cook them, but you don't even have to soak them. You just throw them in there. And with slow cooker, you can soak them, but you don't necessarily have to either. You throw them in there, you cook them all day. You can make a big-ass pot of the fuckers and just drain them, rinse them, toss them in your freezer, and you've got beans. And that can save you a lot of time, especially if you know you eat a lot of certain kinds of beans, whether it's chickpeas or black beans or white beans. You make a ton of them, you throw them in the freezer, and you've got those already prepped, so you just defrost them on the day you want to use them. What do you mean, what is mac and cheese? Oh, mac and cheese is macaroni and cheese. It's noodles, elbow noodles generally, with a cheesy sauce. And if you're making chili mac, you toss chili into the cheesy sauce. So this is making it from scratch. This is not like buying a box of Kraft. But yeah, that's generally what it is. Sorry if that was loud. All right, so let's see. Yeah, beans are going to be your best friend as far as cheap protein is concerned. So is tofu if you learn how to cook it. Now, the tip that I'm going to give about tofu can replace meat, but it is not a meat replacer. And what I mean by that is that you can give it the texture very similar to chicken. You can spice it, you can make it taste very good. But tofu also tastes like tofu. And if you get used to the way that tofu tastes, you can also make unique tofu recipes that don't rely on it tasting like meat. I say this because I enjoy tofu a great deal, so much so that I learned how to make it. Now, you don't have to make tofu to save money. You don't have to make soy milk to save money either. These are things that I do because we go through an inordinate amount of soy milk, 2 to 3 gallons a week, which would get very expensive at the store. And I've got a soy milk maker, which if you do also have a dairy allergy or you're avoiding dairy for some reason, a soy milk maker will save you a lot of money. Personally, I recommend if you do get one, I believe it's Soyajoy G4 is the model that I have. 2 batches of it. It does everything for you except for straining it. 2 batches makes a gallon. A gallon will cost you approximately 75 cents for soybeans if you can get them in bulk for fairly cheap. I go to Winco. I can get a 25-pound bag of soybeans for about $21. That comes out to, per gallon, approximately 75 cents. A gallon of milk also makes about 2 blocks of tofu. So 75 cents for 2 blocks of tofu if you really want to make it. Random things. Tofu is not paneer. Paneer is a hard sort of cheese. Tofu is tofu. It is curdled. This is going to make it sound gross, but it's not. It's curdled soy milk, made very similarly to cottage cheese, but then pressed into a block. So it's kind of like paneer, but different texture, a little less firm. So, but yeah, Kyla, absolutely. Beans and rice are going to be heavy staples, especially brown rice. If you can learn to like the taste of brown rice, you can get it in bulk. And that's going to be another thing. When you're talking about grocery shopping, people are like, oh, bulk is gross, the pandemic, da-da-da. Okay, if you can get bulk items at your store, you should, most of the time. Now, you want to check because sometimes certain things can be about the same. And if you can get separate packages when they're about the same, then you should. But if you can get beans in bulk, are always a good deal. Spices in bulk are going to save your behind. I recommend that anybody who can afford it, go online, get yourself a cheap spice organizer with the individual jars and stuff, and start buying any spices you can in bulk. We save so much freaking money that way. It doesn't sound like it adds up a lot, but if you're paying $5, $10, $15 for a little jar of spices, you can get that same amount for 75 cents to $1. most of the time. Like smoked paprika is like $3 to $5 for a little jar. 35, 75, 85 cents to fill that little jar off my spice rack. So like, especially if you have a bulk store, like a Winco or even Fred Meyer Kroger brand stores, whatever your local Kroger store is, you can Google what they are. Most of them have these bulk aisles for spices. Most of the time, the majority of spices, it's way cheaper to get them in bulk. Like 100%. It just is. Grains, quinoa, rice, that kind of thing, those can be a lot cheaper in bulk. Beans are generally cheaper in bulk. My Winco actually has gluten-free pasta and regular pasta in bulk. Those you have to kind of hit or miss with, see if you like them. I don't like the bulk pasta that they have. I tend to buy the gluten-free Barilla because, again, I've got celiac, so you're going to be getting some tips about how to save money if you're celiac, but these tips also still apply if you are not, because, for example, baking your own bread is still going to be cheaper. Even if you're not celiac, it'll just be a little bit less cheaper. Like, it'll be a little bit less of a price difference if you're not celiac. But these are things that you can do. Learning, if you've got a full-time job or if you're spoony, pressure cooker and slow cooker are going to become your best friends very quickly. One of the nice things about that is that, and I'm going to stress this, planning your meals is going to be really important. If you want to save money, planning around what you want to cook, whether that's specific recipes or just what are known as these shell recipes, which is like, on this day of the week, I'm going to make pizza. On this day of the week, I'm going to make some kind of pasta dish. On this day of the week, I'm going to make some kind of beans and rice dish. On this day of the week, like, there's a PDF document that if I can't find a legitimate source for it online, it used to be available for free. If you guys want it, I'll upload it to my Google Drive because it was always available for free, called More Month Than Money. It talks about this system of every week have set days of the week where certain kinds of recipes get cooked. Whether that's the example that they give, I think, was like a roast dinner on Sunday, and then like a pasta dish on Monday, and on Tuesday it's a salad, and on whatever groupings of food you really like. Like whatever like classifications of food that you really like, things that you know you'll make regularly, casseroles, pizza, pasta, stew, that kind of thing. Especially if you have a set work schedule of some kind where you know what days of the week you're going to be busy. Like for me, I actually have a set work schedule for getting my videos out on time. I do scripting on Thursday, Friday. There's date days for 3 days after that. And Tuesday I do my recording and editing. And then I have my live show on Wednesday and premieres on Thursday, right? Like I know what days of the week I'm going to be the most busy. Tuesday, damn near every time. You can ask my husband. Almost every week, it's a slow cooker meal because I know by the time I'm done working, my back's going to be pissed. I'm not going to be feeling good. I won't have very many spoons. I'll be exhausted. So screw everything. I don't want to cook. But because I know this, and because I've got this sort of system in place, I will like prep my food in the morning before I start work. I'll toss it into the slow cooker, and food is done when I get done with work. Most slow cooker meals take between 8 and 10 hours, depending on whether it's an omnivorous meal or a vegetarian one. Most vegetarian meals take a little shorter, closer to the 6 to 8 hour mark. But when it comes to saving money, the big thing is if you buy food, you want to cook it. And if you're going to be planning your meals, this is one of the ways you can save money, especially if you live by yourself. If you only need, say, half of that 16-ounce can of tomato sauce, well, you better know how you're going to use up the other half, or it's going to grow a garden before you get around to it, right? So if you plan your meals, you might use half of that can in like a pasta dish, and then use the other half in a chili later, or something like that. One of the things that I like to do is tomato paste in particular. When I crack open one of the big cans, because we get the big ones because they're cheaper, I have my husband lay out a parchment paper or wax paper, on a cookie sheet, and then take by the tablespoonful scoops of the tomato paste, put it on there, stick it in the freezer, leave it there overnight. Then collect all those little tablespoonfuls and put them in a baggie. Because tomato paste most often in recipes is used like a tablespoon at a time or maybe a quarter cup at most. So if you take one of those big cans and you crack it open, you only needed like 2 or 3 tablespoons for the recipe. Why waste the rest? You can freeze it, put it in a baggie, and now you've got tablespoons at a time that you can defrost for your meals. If you don't plan your meals around what you already have and around what you need to use up, then you're going to have a little bit of a harder time with like making sure that you get the most out of your money. Because a lot of the way that we end up spending less than $100 a week to feed 3, grown-ass adults is by planning around that stuff. Now, keep in mind, I live in Washington. Our food bills are pretty dang high. The average food bill for a family of 3 to 4 that I know is around $150 to $200 a month. Or $150 to $200 a week, rather. We tend to spend about $50 to $70 a week at most. Sometimes it's as low as $30 or $40. So, Lit Shade, yes, ice cube trays do work well for portioning out stuff like tomato paste. I do the tablespoonful thing on the cookie sheet just because I like measuring out the exact tablespoons. But you're right, and actually, what's even better than that is if you decide to, there are cookbooks that I will recommend if you guys are interested in them. You can make your own bouillon and stuff in slow cookers, and those ice cube trays are fantastic for freezing homemade bouillon. Yeah, $500 a month here in MD. Is that? You'll have to let me know what that is. I'm not sure. I might just be tired. We spend that much for 2 people living in remote areas is great. Yeah. So for 3 people, 50 to 70 a week. We don't eat a lot of processed food. I tend to cook a lot. Oh, Maryland. Ha! I am special. Press F to pay respects for my intelligence, chat. So another thing that can be very, very helpful especially if you're getting your spices in bulk, is learning how to make spice mixes. Now, a lot of you guys probably don't know, I actually used to run a blog called The Corpulent Vegan. You can Google it. There's actually a spice mix page on that old site. I think it's still up. But everything from curry powder to garam masala. If you do a lot of Indian cooking, garam masala is essential, and everybody has different recipes for it. You can try a whole bunch of them and see which ones you like. To spice mixes like barbecue rub, to steak rub, to there's a ton of different spice mixes that you use. Old Bay seasoning is another one. Italian seasoning is another one. And actually, poultry seasoning is one that I make a lot because they only sell it around Thanksgiving time in bulk in my area. So I have to make it all the time because I use it to flavor things throughout the year. Another appliance that's worth investing in is a spice grinder. And the reason for that is because you can get whole cumin, coriander, all kinds of different spices, or larger chunks of things like basil and stuff in cheaper sections, especially in the so-called international aisles, like where the Mexican spices and things are sold. You can sometimes get larger ground things and put them through your spice grinder in mixes in order to make your own spice mixes. And these can add a lot of flavor and flair to your cooking. You can get a lot more control. So if you don't like a certain, say curry powder because it's got a very strong turmeric flavor, you can make your own turmeric. Like you can make your own turmeric less or lower turmeric curry powder very easily. You can add more cloves if you really like cloves, or add less if you don't like them. I had one friend who really didn't like cumin, and so he remade curry powder from scratch using my recipe, but he took the cumin out and added additional thing. Thank you so much. Kata says the spice must flow. Astrid, your food processor, it depends on how powerful it is. I would agree if you said high-speed blender. High-speed blenders can actually even make flour for some kinds of flour, if you don't mind it being whole grain. In fact, I actually made amaranth flour in mine the other day. But food processors, they can break up spices, but they generally don't powder them the way that a spice grinder will. Spice grinders tend to be smaller. They also often tend to be coffee grinders, but I suggest having separate if you use yours for coffee grinding, because the coffee smell and taste will get into every spice you grind in it. You just can't get it out. But like food processors, it's give or take for that. Some of them are powerful enough to do it, and most of them are not. However, if you're doing a lot of vegetarian cooking, I heavily, heavily recommend a high-speed blender. They're going to be expensive. It's probably one of the most expensive things I have in my kitchen. I've had mine for over a decade, and I use it dang near every day. They're excellent for sauce making. If you've got dairy allergies or dairy sensitivities in your house, they're also excellent for making things like nut cheeses, like bases, that sort of thing, smoothies, soups. In fact, for my low spoon people in the audience, can I get a hand up if you're a spoonie in my audience? Tell me how amazing this sounds. You take a whole bunch of things, maybe you cop the top and bottom off, take the seeds out, whatever. You throw them in there with the liquid, you turn it on, and it runs for 3 to 5 minutes, and it comes out hot. Tell me how amazing that sounds on a low spoon day. Because a high-speed blender, a Vitamix or a Ninja, can absolutely cook your soup all the way through completely. Now, keep in mind these are pureed soups. It can cook it all the way through completely with just the friction from the blades. Because that's how powerful these motherfuckers are. Like, seriously, tell me how amazing that sounds. Dal is more of a stew or a curry, IMO. I've had dal before a few times. Yeah, like, tell me that doesn't sound like the best on a low spoon fucking day. Like, tell me that doesn't sound incredible. Again, this is a completely pureed soup, but like a tomato bisque or something like that, toss all the shit in there, let it run for 2 to 3 minutes, it comes out frickin' steaming, and you can just pour it straight in your bowl. Yep, that's a thing. It's a thing I've done before. In fact, when I've made mac and cheese with cashews as the sauce base, I've actually cooked the sauce in the Vitamix because I didn't feel like cooking it on my stove. I was like, I've got all of my burners are taken up. I've got stuff sauteing in this one. I've got, noodles boiling in that one. Nah, bro. I'm just going to fucking put everything in the Vitamix and I'll just let it run and it'll get thick in there. And it does. It actually does. You can cook vegan mac and cheese sauce in a Vitamix. It's incredible. Home gardens, I think home gardens are amazing if you've got the property for them or if you've got space on a deck or something. I actually grow about a quarter of the food I eat every year in the summer, most of the time. This year we're having to replace all of our boxes. It's looking like we might not actually have a crop this year because we had a termite infestation in all of my raised beds that kind of destroyed them. And, we've had them for a good 8 or 9 years. You can't use treated wood to make raised bed gardens, so we had to replace ours. And because of that, unfortunately, it's taking longer than we expected to replace 22 garden boxes. It's looking like we're going to have to postpone that until next year. Excuse me. Yeah, Vitamixes are built like fucking tank engines. Just, make sure you've got them off when you stick your hands in them. That's a horror show waiting to happen. Yeah, like soup is freaking amazing. And actually, while we're on the subject of soup and stew and the like, slow cookers. Let's talk a little bit about how to make your slow cooker work for you, because there's a lot of cool shit you can do with them. And there's also a lot less dishes for them for the most part. You might, basically, if you're making a slow cooker meal, chances are 9 times out of 10, the only dishes you've got are your cutting board, your knife, your saute pan, because usually it's a good idea to saute onions and garlic and all that stuff to get a little bit of flavor out of them before you toss them in the slow cooker, and the slow cooker crock. It's a lot less dishes than the majority of food you're going to cook. Slow cookers are absolutely great for anything moist, but you'd be surprised at some of the cool shit you can do with them. For example, raise your hand if you know what a frittata is. I make them pretty useful. I make them pretty regularly. One of my favorite things to do is actually there's this pasta frittata that I make out of tofu fairly regularly. Takes about 2 or 3 hours in the slow cooker. Comes out, you put a little bit of cooking spray in there, make sure it doesn't stick. Comes out firm, just as though you had baked it. But you don't have to micromanage it. So the answer is, David, I would not recommend doing unrinsed beans anywhere ever. At the very minimum, rinse them to get all the dirt and dust and stuff off of them. They are not clean when you get them at the store. They go through a sort of cleaning process. But they're not, no, they don't do that. As far as unsoaked beans, I don't recommend using unsoaked beans in a slow cooker. You technically can, but I recommend cooking them fully the day before in your slow cooker and then using them later for your chili. You want to have cooked beans for your chili in your slow cooker. Mostly because there are concerns with liquid and other things, and also there are toxins that are in bean skins that if they're not cooked at a high enough temperature, that's what makes you gassy, which is why I actually recommend most people, if you've got a pressure cooker, cook your beans, your unsoaked beans in the pressure cooker. It only takes like, depending, about an hour to an hour and a half with, like pressure time and cool down time. The actual cook time is usually between 25 and 45 minutes, depending on the bean. There are charts you can find online. Pressure cookers bring them up to that temperature wicked fast, and you can cook them unsoaked, everything, toss them in your slow cooker that same day for a chili. Let's see. I keep rice and lentils as staples. I always have tomatoes and cucumbers on hand as often as possible. Tomatoes and cucumbers together, I tend to make this really amazing with, if you've got tomatoes, cucumbers, onions, and some kind of protein. You can do chickpeas, you can do tofu, you can do, like veggie meats, or if you're a carnivore, you can eat actual meats, or an omnivore rather. But you can do that with a little bit of vinegar and a little bit of sugar, and you can make like a Thai sweet and sour, and that's amazing. So let's go back to slow cookers. Slow cookers are fantastic. A lot of people think you can only make like soups and stews and stuff in them, but you can make all kinds of cool shit. You can make lasagna in your slow cooker. You can make mac and cheese in your slow cooker. There are a lot of things, but A, I highly recommend getting a slow cooker specific cookbook if you're going to be doing that. And B, make sure you read the recipe when you're doing your meal planning to make sure that it's not a 3 to 4 hour recipe if you're going to be at work all damn day. Right? That's a thing. These are wonderful, wonderful machines that can save you a ton of time if you actually put in the work to kind of understand how to use them. So, like, yes, you can absolutely, Aylin, you can absolutely do bread in the slow cooker. You can do pizza in your damn slow cooker if you want to. However, if you want to bake bread regularly, you don't have to invest in a bread maker, but getting a halfway decent one, like a mid-grade, is going to be really, really helpful if you plan on baking bread frequently, especially if you're doing it on like your days off, which brings me back to sort of planning. When you plan your meals, you want to make sure that if you have to make staples, whether that's, for me, a lot of the time I check spice mixes to make sure that I've got all of the spice mixes that I need on hand. If I've got any more that I need to make, I make sure to buy extra of those things. Yes, Orcus is right, but make sure that you can test it in the store, because some thrift stores do not let you test them. But yeah, we got our slow cooker, our first one, from a thrift store. The one that I currently have is new because I got a modular model with multiple different inserts. One of them's a split insert, one of them's a smaller one of them's a bigger one. But our first slow cooker that we had for years and years, we got for like $10 at a thrift store. My first bread maker came from a thrift store. You can get a lot of cheap appliances at a thrift store. You're probably not going to find a Vitamix there. They'll usually put those up for auction online. But, like, I highly, highly recommend, for most basic appliances, you can find versions in the thrift store. The only caveat I'd put to that is if you have food sensitivities, you probably shouldn't be buying them in the thrift store, because especially if you've got, say, gluten sensitivities or something like I do, where you're celiac or you have another condition like that, cross-contamination can absolutely be a thing. No matter how much you clean certain things, there will still be contamination. But if you don't have those kinds of sensitivities and you're on a budget, it can be a very good thing. However, we're back to planning. Let's talk about planning. The first thing you need to decide when you're talking about trying to be on a budget is how much work are you willing to do? How many days do you think, especially if you're a spoonie, plan around your bad days, not around your good ones. In other words, know that you need to have at least one good day a week to, say, bake bread or things like that, but most of your meal planning should be based around the idea that you're probably not going to have a lot of energy or time or whatever. You want to plan for the worst case scenario rather than the best one. The other thing is you want to make sure you have a very well-stocked pantry. I talked about bulk buying, getting large cans and boxes of certain kinds of things. Pasta, for example, I'll buy extra of while I'm out because, like, extra elbow noodles and, like spaghetti and stroganoff noodles, those sorts of things. Those are very easy to add to throw together meals. I can make a casserole out of that very easily. Pasta can be like throwing together a mac and cheese can be very simple. These are things that I know I can turn to if, for example, we can't go shopping for an extra couple days because somebody got called into work and the car is not going to be available, or if I'm particularly not feeling well, if my back's out, that kind of thing. I have emergency meals that I keep extra ingredients around the house in case, for some reason, we can't get to things. Another good example for this is actually frozen stir-fry mixes. You can get a frozen stir-fry mix in most grocery stores in the frozen aisle. And if you toss the frozen stir-fry mix in with some kind of protein and you cook some rice in a pressure cooker, that's a meal and it only takes a few minutes. It's very easy. You can have that. It's a long-lasting thing that can stay for up to 2 months in your freezer without having to worry about it too much. Those can be incredible. Fajita mix, like bell pepper frozen mix, that's another thing that can be a very good base for a meal. These are things that you can plan around that are not expensive, but they're still like pre-made. Canned food can be very good. There's a debate between canned and frozen food. I tend to prefer, for example, canned green beans, but I prefer frozen peas. I don't really like canned peas all that much. Tomatoes should never be frozen. I don't know why anybody would do that. Frozen stir-fry mix can be a lot better. But last night I posted pictures of the polenta dish that I made that was made entirely out of extra canned food that we had in our fridge. I was going to be making a pan-seared sort of mushroom and wine glazed thing, which sounds a lot more complex than it is. And the mushrooms had gone bad, which made me sad. But I was like, oh shit, what do? I went digging around in my pantry and I had a can of mixed vegetables that was there for God's know how long. I checked, it wasn't expired or anything, but it was there. A can of tomatoes, a can of olives. What was the other thing that I threw in there? I'm trying to remember. Oh, half a bag of frozen bell pepper mix. Toss those things together with a little bit of wine and some spices, and I've got a substitute for the dinner I was going to make that can still go on top of the polenta. The polenta is another one of those bulk grains, cornmeal. Fine or heavy ground cornmeal. If you learn how to make staple dishes like polenta, like brown rice, like other things, if you get a set of staple grains, grain plus some kind of veggies plus some kind of protein. In the case of this meal, you're like, well, where's the protein? The peas in the mix actually were. Peas have quite a bit of protein in them. But these are examples of if you have base grains, which particularly for things like brown rice is actually something you can make a whole lot of and freeze extra portions of or refrigerate it to throw together things. You can also do stuff like prepping large amounts of vegetables and other things. If you say, for example, no, you really like wraps, if you don't like leftovers, you can make large amounts of different kinds of vegetables, fruits, etc. As long as you know for a fact you're going to use them all up before the end of the week. Astrid, white rice is bad for you. I do not eat it for that reason for the most part. Very rarely do I. But I tend to prefer to eat brown rice. And brown rice isn't that much more expensive. Brown rice, if you get it in bulk. But yeah, MUI, Astrid is actually correct about the eggs. You do actually have to refrigerate American eggs. But rice and fried veggies is another good example. But making a big pot of brown rice, making it for that night, and then, sort of storing the rest of it, you can make fried rice the next day. That's another example of continuous meals. But when you're going back to planning, you need to ask yourself how much you're willing to do. I, for example, make fresh batches of vegan cheese every week because we're, again, dealing with allergies in my house. I'm allergic to dairy. So I make 2 blocks of cheese every week. I make a block of veggie meats for sandwiches. And I make 2 loaves of bread every week. That happens on one particular day of the week. Slow cooker meal on that same day because I'm working in the kitchen for so long that I'm freaking exhausted. So that's one thing that I'm willing to do. But you might not be. You might be willing to spend a little bit extra on getting cheeses and stuff at the store. Okay, that's fine. That's a decision you need to make. Where are you going to splurge? And where are you willing to do a little bit of extra work? Now, one of the things I will tell you is that if you learn knife skills, and you invest in a good set of knives, and you keep your knives sharp, then it is always a ripoff to buy the pre-prepped veggies, unless they're the frozen aisle. Like pre-prepped bell peppers, fruits, that kind of thing. They're always going to be significantly more expensive because you are now paying for the labor that went into prepping them. Also, a lot of the time, those vegetables and fruits are on the edge of not quite being sellable when they get sold that way. So, like, don't expect if you buy, like, those hamburger mixes or things like that that you can get in the store. If you buy one of those, don't expect it to last very long in your fridge because those things are on the out when they take them out. I used to work in the produce aisle. Like, that's a whole thing that happens. So when you are thinking about your sort of meal planning, the categories thing is one method of doing that. What I generally do is we've got a pasta day, we have a soup day, we have a stew day, we have like sandwiches, we have one leftover day, because one of the methods that I also do is we save, like, I make big batches of dinner and we save leftover containers of that dinner in the fridge and we eat those for lunch the next day. Breakfast is prep it for yourself. Sometimes it's eggs because, again, we have to have eggs around the house. I'm not vegan, I'm vegetarian, as I've said. But like we have eggs around the house for baking, so we sometimes eat eggs, sometimes it's cereal, sometimes it's oatmeal. Like there's lots of different things. If you do want oatmeal, getting the old-fashioned oats and cooking them yourself and adding your own like seasonings and stuff to them is going to be a lot cheaper than buying the pre-packed package, like packets that you can get in the boxes. Like it's cheaper to do it yourself. But for the most part, if you can potentially get yourself like the whole thing and you can prep, like if you don't have physical things that are limiting you from doing that, it's almost always a ripoff to buy pre-prepped veggies. Like it's way more expensive. And again, there are some things that you might choose to pay extra for. Rilla mentioned, hey, I'm paying not to lop a finger off. If you have things like, say, seizure disorders, or if you have, some sort of like nerve problem or, issues with being on your feet long enough to do prep, like I can understand why you would do that. But for most of us, that tip very much applies, right? There isn't a massive difference in the price between fresh veggies, canned veggies, and frozen veggies. The big thing is that if you've got like a heart condition or you're watching your salt, canned veggies might not be the best choice for you. So think about that a little bit. Canned and frozen veggies are almost always a decent choice for the majority of things you can find in the frozen aisle. I use frozen cauliflower pretty regularly. I use like frozen stir fry mixes, like I mentioned. I use a lot of like frozen peas and corn and that kind of thing. Well, I have a book recommendation for you, Elise. If you there is a book called The Vegetable Butcher. Google it. It is a fantastic book that shows you how to do just about any prep you could ever find in a recipe, which brings me to another book recommendation, How to Cook Everything, or for the vegetarians among us, How to Cook Everything Vegetarian. This book has what I would call shell recipes, which are these, like, this is how you make a lasagna, this is how you make a stir fry, this is how you bake a loaf of bread, and then it's got a bunch of variations underneath it for different seasonal vegetable combinations that you might be able to get your hands on. So what I'm going to suggest here is that once you learn how to do very basic cooking, whether that's how to make a casserole, how to make mac and cheese, you can make a very basic staple meal exciting and seasonal just by knowing how to make the base. I have a very basic cheese sauce that I make for mac and cheese. And if you need to, for example, if you need to throw together a quick meal, having a box of Elbow mac in your fridge, plus, like, for me, it's cashews and water and nutritional yeast is the flavoring to make it taste cheesy, and various spices and things. If I've got frozen broccoli, I can make broccoli mac. If I've got, a can of jackfruit, I can make something that's closer to a Krabby Mac. Jackfruit, Old Bay seasoning, a little bit of nori, that can make a very different seeming meal. Chili mac. You can have a basic staple recipe like, another example is lasagna. If you know how to make lasagna, you've got lasagna noodles in there. I can make a white lasagna with butternut squash and sage sauce. I can make a red lasagna with like zucchini and mushrooms. I can make other kinds of lasagna. Like I've made ones with like layers, a more Mexican like style lasagna. There's a bunch of different kinds of things you can make. With casseroles, like a basic sort of noodly casserole, noodles in cans of 2 or 3 different kinds of cans of vegetables, little bit of some kind of sauce, whether that's like a tomato sauce or a cheesy sauce, sprinkle that with some kind of flavoring agent, some kind of protein. The more you learn how to cook very basic things, the more flexible you're going to be in the kitchen. Oh, thank you so much, Howard. I'm not actually sure what currency is that. NOK. Thank you so much. And Skull. 100 NOK. I'm not sure what currency that is. You'll have to let me know in the live chat what kind of currency that is. Eggplant lasagna is yummy. I tend to have texture issues with eggplant, so I have to chop it up really itty bitty when I do that. But yeah, it's actually really yummy. Another more fancy one I've had is Norwegian krone. Thank you so much, Astrid and Kyla. Norwegian krone. That's cool. But yeah, like I actually have had a slightly more fancy lasagna that I made, which was a sort of olive oil and butter sauce lasagna with artichoke hearts. And I had like canned artichoke hearts that somebody had given me. So it's fantastic. If you learn how to make very basic meals, especially things like rice casseroles, fried rice is one of the most flexible things on earth. Extra prepped veggies. Remember when I was talking about using up odds and ends? Extra prepped veggies. Damn near anything can go into fried rice. You can make a Mexican style fried rice. You can make Asiatic fried rices. You can, rice is such a staple, and pre-cooked cold rice can be tossed into a frying pan with God's know what else. You got bits and pieces of some kind of protein, whether that's beans or, chicken or tofu or whatever. Toss that in there. You can toss it with eggs. You can have bits and pieces of fairly inexpensive onions, carrots, peas, celery. If you prep a whole bunch at the beginning of the week, like I talked about, and you have extra odds and ends, fried rice is a great way to use all that up. And it's also one of the ways you can use up cold rice. So let's see. I'd try eggplant, but my mom was allergic to it. I'm sorry, MUI. That is unfortunate. Norwegian kroners. It's 100 kroner to $12. Well, thank you so much for your super chat. Eggplant is very, very good. But like I said, I have texture issues with it, so I have to cook it in certain ways in order to enjoy it. One of my favorites, though, and this one is, again, another little bit of self-indulgent, is to get a good quality olive oil. And I will make ratatouille. And ratatouille is the best. So, Kyla, fried rice is one of the easiest things on the planet. Get out your notebook. This is really easy. So you cook your brown rice or your regular rice the night before. Usually, again, it's a great way to use up leftovers. So make your stir fry, whatever. Make enough rice to have extra. Leave a few cups, usually 2 to 3. Take some notes. Put it in your fridge. Let it firm up. Then, the next day, most basic fried rice recipe you'll ever hear in your life. Mine's going to have tofu in it. You can use your protein, whatever protein you want here. You're going to want a half a pound of tofu, about a cup of frozen peas that have already been defrosted. So, you might want to put your cup in your fridge overnight or something. 2 small carrots, a stalk of celery, and an onion. You want to dice those up pretty fine. Well, except the peas. You can leave the peas alone. Then you're going to take a couple tablespoons of olive oil and you're going to heat them up on the medium-high heat. You're going to saute those onions and the carrot and the celery together until they're mostly kind of heavily browned, usually about 5 minutes on medium-high. You want to stir them around a lot, stir-frying. And then you want to make sure that oil is really heated and coating the pot, because then you're going to toss your rice in. And you want to take a couple tablespoons, maybe 2 or 3, of soy sauce, and a tablespoon of rice vinegar, and toss those in with it, and cook the rice itself until it's kind of shiny and glistening and absorbs most of the liquid. You can add a little bit of ketchup or something into that, but cook that for 5 to 7 minutes or so until it kind of absorbs the liquid. That's if you're using brown rice. If you're using white rice, it'll be a little shorter and quicker. That was easy. That's how you make fried rice. It's pretty dang easy. Like it's bulky. You can use up your stuff. The tofu would be cooked by itself separately, and you toss it in toward the end, usually. But yeah, that's the easy way to make fried rice. Soy sauce, a couple tablespoons of soy sauce, a tablespoon of rice vinegar. You can toss a little bit of ketchup in there if you want to, add a little bit of a flavor or tomato paste. And if you like it a little bit sweet, you can add like a teaspoon of sugar. If you don't, you can add like ginger and garlic. But yeah, all kinds of different flavors. But yeah, also Astrid's right, don't use olive oil. That's why I said vegetable oil. Vegetable oil in the store is usually soybean oil, and it has a pretty high smoke point. You wouldn't want to use canola oil either. Normally, I'd say canola oil is pretty good for all-purpose sautéing and stuff, but canola oil also has a low enough smoke point that you probably don't want to use it for this specifically. Scarred Falconer says, I'm a big fan of what me and my girlfriend call peasant food, meatloaf, fried rice, anything that's fairly forgiving when you put into it and combines food types. Yep, one-pot meals are going to be a lot of... They're going to be extremely helpful. However, here's another tip. Most takeout is actually pretty dang easy to make yourself. If you really like Indian, there are cookbooks you can get for how to make Indian food. You can probably make your favorite stuff at the restaurants pretty easily. There are lots of cookbooks for how to make American Chinese food. I say that because most people have not had authentic Chinese food unless you live in like Chinatown or unless you know somebody who knows how to make it. But it's a fuck of a lot cheaper to make it yourself than it will be to order it out. It's not that expensive actually to make cloned versions of most takeouts, especially for things like Indian food, Chinese food, Thai food. Most of that stuff, if you like it a lot and you order a lot of takeout, then it's going to be a lot cheaper to make it yourself. In fact, one of the things you can do to sort of broaden your horizons is to research ethnic peasant food. Like stuff that you would normally buy at a restaurant is actually probably pretty cheap to make in general, because otherwise they wouldn't make a profit off of it, for the most part. I love Sichuan cuisine. Like, I absolutely fucking love it. I lived in Guangzhou for a few years, or not for a few years, for a few months, sorry. And I absolutely fell in love with the spicy food there. It was fucking incredible. And actual Chinese food is not nearly as sweet as the stuff that you get here in the States. Let's see. Shallow pan frying and deep frying can be your friends. It depends on, again, what you're concerned about in terms of health stuff. Let's see. Yes, dal is actually another example of an inexpensive food. Fry bread's another one. Fry bread is one of my favorites growing up as a Native American. We made quite a lot of it. Let's see. I'm trying to think, are there any other questions you guys have? I covered quite a few of the things that I initially wanted to talk about. Things like, for breakfast and stuff, again, grains are going to be your best friend here. Everything from, like, cream of wheat's going to be a little more expensive, and again, I can't have it. But stuff like grits, stuff like oatmeal, if you make it yourself instead of buying the prepackaged stuff, the less packaging between you and the product, the cheaper it's going to be. But again, there are some strategies that I've talked about that can make it so that your labor stretches further and doesn't feel as intense. Like, for example, if you know you're going to be making fried rice and a lasagna, and you have a, some kind of ingredient, let's say you wanted to put zucchini in both, you can dice the zucchini at the beginning of the week, and as long as within 3 or 4 days that you use up all the zucchini that you diced, you already have that ready for when you get home from work, or like for when you're tired and in pain, like in my case, right? Chives from the garden do make egg drop soup better, 100%. Actually, if you can grow your own herbs at home, even in just a windowsill, do that. It is so much cheaper even than buying the dried stuff at the store, and it tastes amazing. Scarred, I actually went over cooking hardware earlier. The things that I recommend the most, for a recap for those who haven't been here from the beginning: high-speed blender. It's going to be one of your best friends, especially if you're a spoonie. A slow cooker and a pressure cooker. both of which, if you don't have food sensitivities and allergies that you're worried about, you might be able to find at a thrift store. Otherwise, they're both fairly inexpensive pieces of hardware. And if your household goes through a lot of bread, I highly recommend getting a bread maker. Mid-tier models usually run about $100. I know that sounds like a lot, but it's worth every penny if you're making bread regularly because it's set it and forget it, which is amazing. Yes, fruit is going to be your best friends. Honey, significantly less so. Honey isn't particularly much better for you than regular sugar. But fruit is absolutely going to be your best friend, especially ripe fruit in season, which actually, since we're talking about planning, let's talk about sales and seasonality, because there are some things that get cheaper at certain times of year. I'm sure you all have noticed that, certain fruits go on sale at certain times of year. In the fall, there's a big sale on apples and squash. And, in the summertime, zucchini and like tomatoes, they'll go on sale during certain months. If you know when the bumper crop in your area is going to come in for certain things, and you know about shell recipes, you can plan your casseroles, your lasagnas, your, fried rice, your roasts, all of that around what you know is going to go on sale because it's going to be seasonal. It's better to buy fresh tomatoes in the summer when they're cheaper than the canned ones, but it's better to get the canned ones in the winter if you want those things. So learning how to plan around that can increase the quality of your food significantly. It can also get you to look forward to certain things. For example, February, March is my favorite time of the year because asparagus and artichokes both go on sale. It's the only time of year I'll generally buy them. They're incredible. They're delicious. I love taking an artichoke and slivering a garlic and putting the slices in between the artichoke leaves. Cut off the top, cut off the bottom, put it in the pressure cooker for 10, 15 minutes. Out it comes, dip it in some aioli. It is some of the best shit. Just absolutely incredible. Seasonality still does exist, Astrid. Especially when it comes to companies that tend to source locally. Seasonality does still exist. That's why sales happen during certain times of the year. Granted, just because you can buy things year-round doesn't mean you should. So just because you can get tomatoes from Mexico doesn't mean that you should get them, and it doesn't mean that they won't be more expensive because they had to be shipped further, right? Let's see. I like my dandelion honey, homemade, totally awesome if you know your dandelions are clean enough to eat. Huh, that's interesting. Yep, apples are a bumper crop here. I'm not sure we'll have as many apples this year because we kept getting late spring freezes. Yeah, apples are a bumper crop up here too. Do you live in the greater Seattle area, Reindeer Games? But yeah, Asmodeus, as Asmodeus just said, when they're in season, chances are you're probably going to be getting something that's a little more local. And it's also probably going to taste better. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, eating seasonally. But there are also some things that you can only get at certain times a year. Again, you can get artichokes year-round, but they taste like buttsack if you buy them pretty much any other time than February and March. Because they're going to be tough. Same with asparagus. It's going to be thick and woody and gross. Tomatoes taste like buttsack if you buy them in the winter because they're green and they got gassed and then they got shipped. They suck. But if you buy them in the summertime, during certain months, usually July, August, they're going to be at their best. So again, when you're talking about flavor, if you're talking about actually wanting to eat what you cook, seasonality does matter. They're going to taste better if you get them in their seasons. Apples taste better in the fall because they're fresher. So now that we're coming back to sort of planning, and when it comes to seasonality and things, learning the seasons for vegetables especially can help you save money because, again, they go on sale during certain times of year because they get extras and because the price drops. But there's also a consideration for flavor, texture, and the reason to look forward to certain months. Like I mentioned, February, March, it's one of my favorite times of year. November is when the Satsumas come in. That's the only time of the year that you can get that. Off-season corn is terrible, but in season, as Scarred Falconer just said, it's absolutely amazing. Especially if you're considering purchasing food to store, which personally I recommend if you have property, grow your food if you can. But if you can't, if you're considering purchasing stuff for storage and you want to store it yourself, getting it when it's seasonal means that you're going to be storing it when it's at its peak. So, do you guys, we're hitting at about an hour. Do you guys have any more questions or concerns or anything that you would like to address about the topic? Astrid, I don't know, like, do you not taste the difference between actually ripe food and, like, not ripe food? Have you tasted the difference between a strawberry that's been, like, sun ripened in the summer and a strawberry that you buy in the dead of winter? Because, like, the strawberry in the dead of winter tastes like fake. It tastes like sour, whereas the one that you'd get in the height of summer actually tastes sweet. There's a distinct difference. No dislikes, we're all the Gordon Ramsay fans. We need some angry cooking comments. Yeah, how many likes are we at right now? I seem to be having some kind of refresh problem. It says I've only got 8 at the moment. CSA boxes. So this can be hit or miss depending on where you live, but it is a good tip. If you can get into CSA and you have the money to put up front, yes. Community supported agriculture is what CSA stands for. They can be fantastic. You get boxes of whatever the CSA produces. You get a portion of it delivered either to a pickup spot or to your house, depending on the CSA. Sometimes it can be a fantastic deal, sometimes significantly less so. It depends on where you live and what the CSA is and whether or not you're going to use everything in your box. So those can be extremely useful if you have the upfront money for them. However, most people don't. So it is, if you have the money to look into them, they can be fantastic, but it depends on the place that you live. Yeah, I do know that some do month to month. None of the ones in my area do. So that's why I'm giving these sorts of caveats. CSAs can be fantastic because you are supporting like local farmers and usually pretty dang directly when it comes to CSAs. So they actually can be fantastic. But if you're on something like food stamps, often they don't accept them. However, farmers markets do, and farmers markets, you can get sometimes very, very good deals, especially if your state has a program like mine, where if you've got food stamps or things, and you can go and trade them for, like tokens or something to purchase things at farmers markets. A lot of farmers and farmers markets will toss extra things in for folks with food stamps because they understand what it's like to struggle. Lester, no. 90% of the time, no. Organic's not all that much better than non-organic. It really depends on the thing. The only thing that organic can be better for at times is that sometimes it's more seasonal because there's less shit being pumped into it, so to speak. But for the majority of things, if you're concerned about pesticides and stuff, just wash your fruits and veggies. It's really not that big a deal. It's a lot of extra charge to not use certain compounds, unless you have a sensitivity to certain herbicides or pesticides, in which case you need a test or something to confirm that. But in terms of nutrition and stuff like that, the only difference between them is the price. Yeah, Aylin. And a lot of people, if you don't live near a large city or something, finding a CSA might be difficult. But yeah, basically, if you're worried about pesticides, herbicides, and shit, just wash your produce. It's not really a big deal. The organic thing is, there's nothing particularly special about organic produce. Again, except for the fact that some organic things, because of the fact that they tend to be local, can be more flavorful during certain months because they're more likely to be fresh than something that you might get out in the wider world. But if you're that worried about organic stuff, go to a farmer's market. There's lots of organic growers there, and you'll be paying the farmer directly instead of paying an intermediary like a store. At least we just went over that. CSA is community supported agriculture. They're groups of farmers that you can pay directly for a portion of their crop. Basically, you get boxes all through the year after paying an upfront cost. Some of them do month to month, some of them don't. But you get assortments of a percentage of everything they grow. So you might get an assortment of berries and tomatoes and carrots and onions and celery and that kind of thing. And you can get the CSA box and then plan your food around it. So it is a lot more environmentally friendly, but it can also be more expensive. So you do need to make sure that you compare the average take from like the CSA box that you're looking into with what you normally buy, and make sure that the stuff that they grow is going to be something that you're going to regularly eat. So it is a big decision to make. It's a big upfront commitment, but it is an option if you have the money for it. So yeah, they might have CSAs in the city that you're moving into, Reindeer Games. Potatoes, yes. So staple crops: onions, potatoes, celery, garlic, canned tomatoes, mixed veggies. Making sure you have staples on hand. Like I said, most dinners are pretty easy to throw together. Something like a starch, veggies, and a protein. Protein doesn't have to be meat. It can be beans, it can be tofu, it can be peas, it can be all kinds of stuff. Sometimes the protein can be all of those different things combined. Examples of starches include things like polenta, quinoa can also be a protein as well. Like bread of some kind, pasta of some kind. Here's another one though: baked potato. Baked potato topped with stir fry is one of my favorite meals ever. You can also top it with like pizza toppings. You can top it with like cottage cheese and other baked like veggies. A baked potato can be the start to so many meals, and it's very easy. In fact, you can even make it in your microwave without actually baking it. Like, you prick it a whole bunch, and there's timing online for how long you'd have to do it, depending on the size of the potato. Like, it's dependent on the weight. But you toss it in your microwave, and you can have a baked potato. Like, and if you've got leftover toppings, like, say you made a little too much stir fry for the amount of rice you had, well, now you can toss that on top of it. It's delicious. So, like, baked potatoes are fantastic. Rice is another huge staple. Pasta. These things can be your staples. Again, I recommend whole grain if you can get it, or if you're gluten-free, obviously, we can't eat anything but whole grain, because that's what they make. If you bake your own bread, work your bread into your meals. Don't just make bread and, like, only have sandwiches or something. Like, bread pudding, for example, is a great way to use up bread. If you don't use up a ton of bread, but you still want to bake it, you can also freeze it. So you can make a bunch of different loaves, like, say, once a month or something. You can freeze a whole bunch. If you don't use your freezer for a ton of other stuff. But there's a lot of different ways in which you can really reserve and preserve your money and really use up your ingredients. Things to make sure you always have in your pantry. Take a look at the stuff you cook the most often. What recipes do you like the best? What things do you know you'll eat a leftover of? What things do you know you'll cook with a leftover of? Plan at least a few of these every week. Maybe if you're craving takeout, try to find a recipe for the takeout. Make that instead. You'll make a lot more of it for a lot less. And if you have to get specialty ingredients, well, now you've got more incentive to make more of that kind of takeout for yourself over the next coming weeks, right? So hopefully these tips have helped you guys. I don't know is there anything that anybody feels that I didn't get a chance to cover, or any questions that you guys had that I didn't hit? Because I feel like I've covered the majority of the things that I think about when I'm planning meals. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. Cookbooks, having a good collection of them can be very, very helpful, especially if you know the kind of food you like to eat. One of the ones for vegetarian meals that I highly recommend is called Vegan on the Cheap. I've gone through 7 copies of it because I keep giving it away to people, because people fall in love with the recipes when they come over to my house and they have dinner with us, and then they're like, where'd you get this from? How to Cook Everything. That series is fantastic. Also, Kathy Hester's The Vegan Slow Cooker is an absolutely amazing. The Vegan Pressure Cooker is another good one. And all of Robin Robertson's vegetarian cookbooks are amazing. I mentioned that earlier, Sarana, actually. Kitchen Witchery, but that's a whole stream. I don't do magic, Scarred. That's not something I cover all that much on my channel. I used to, but it's not something that I personally do, so I feel like it would be better to have somebody else talk about that. Astrid, I spend less money than the average lower class person does to feed 3 people. You absolutely can be vegetarian. It's just a matter of how much work you want to do. Just make them take pictures of the cookbook. No, I mean, like, what'll happen is I'll wear my copy out and people will want it, and I'll be like, here, you can have it, because I guess I'll just get myself a new copy. But yeah, we've gone through 7 or 8 copies. But yeah, Astrid, I actually spend significantly less money than the average person, like the average, like, lower class person. You know, I spend less per month than the food stamp allocation for a single person. Beans are cheap, tofu's cheap, veggies are cheap if you buy them in season and you know how to shop for them. Like, legitimately, any vegetarian protein is going to be cheaper than damn near any meat protein. Just saying. It is not expensive to be vegetarian unless you're buying prepackaged stuff. And again, I am celiac and vegetarian, so I have to purchase the much more expensive flours and stuff to bake my bread. Sous Chef's Indigenous Kitchen. I'll have to check that out. That's kind of cool. Why wouldn't they accept food stamps for produce? Where would you go that would not accept food stamps for produce? I've never heard of that. Because, like, that's actually federally illegal to not accept food stamps for produce. As far as finding recipes and things, since people are talking about that, there are cookbooks. There are also tons and tons of blogs online. If you're celiac like me, Gluten Free on a Shoestring is incredible. Like, absolutely freaking incredible. I'm trying to think, let's see, what are some other blogs that I can recommend? Let's see. Because there aren't a ton that are, like, that I go to that aren't, like, specialty blogs as far as vegetarian stuff is concerned. I have such a massive collection of cookbooks, which, by the way, Half Price Books, Value Village, other sort of thrift stores, you can get cookbooks for very, very cheap there. And a lot of them can be very good, especially, like, you know, budgetary cookbooks and things of that nature. But Googling recipes can be very, very useful. There are also really good meal planning apps and things that you can get. The one that I recommend the most is Forks Over Knives, the meal planner. If you're looking at going plant-based, especially if you want to go oil-free, their meal planner is incredible, and it's only like $15 a month, I think, which, you know, depending on your budget, might be a little bit on the high end, but it's like they create like shopping recipes and things for you. It makes tons and tons of leftovers. The food there is incredible. Like, it's really, really good. And it's not like one of those meal prep kits where, like, they ship it all to you. You still have to go shopping and prep it and stuff yourself, but it's a lot better than other options if you don't want to have to go and, like, buy cookbooks and things like that. Personally, though, if you're going to just buy one, How to Cook Everything Vegetarian is the one cookbook that you need for literally everything. It teaches you just about anything that you could ever want to make. Most shit's covered in there, including most base takeout. Yeah, Lucy is correct there. Not all places have to take food stamps, but they cannot deny you any cold food. It is illegal for them to take food stamps for some things, but not produce. Like, you can actually report them for that. Adult beverages for dietary restricted people. Make sure if you're getting vodka that it's potato vodka. Most wines are gluten-free. If you're looking for rum is generally gluten-free. Tequila is generally gluten-free. Most beer is not. Yeah, beans are freaking cheap. Beans are going to be, like, dried beans, even in a food desert, are still going to be cheaper than damn near any meat protein that you could possibly buy. Like, they just are. Cooking on a Bootstrap. I'll have to check that blog out. But yeah, there's Robin Robertson's blog is also excellent. So is Kathy Hester's. Check out both of them. I recommend both of their cookbooks as well. I love pretty much everything they've ever written. Like, it's fantastic. So yeah, I think that pretty much. I think that pretty much covers most of everything that I'd be talking about. Offerings. That's the last thing. Part of the reason I talked about baking your own bread is that, at least as a Hellenist, bread is a damn near universal offering. Wine and grape juice, obviously. But bread, making bread in shapes of various animals can replace animal offerings. It was traditional, actually, to bake loaves or slices of bread or like small buns or things or honey cakes. If you get proficient at baking, you can make offerings for a lot cheaper and they feel a lot more meaningful because you baked them. I highly, highly recommend it. There are lots of really good websites and like online recipes and things for baking. I recommend getting a bread machine cookbook if you do decide to get a bread machine. But if you don't, you can make buns and things and like loaves and such, even just on a baking sheet pretty easily. You can get a bread pan pretty easily. There's a little more micromanagement involved in making sure that you watch it rise and everything else. But it is very, very easy, and it's a fantastic way to make it more personal when you're making something. It came from your hands. You put the work in to make it. Now, granted, food offerings, you can also offer parts of your food, like, for example, at Hecate's Deipnon, you can take a whole plate of whatever dinner you made that night and offer that to her. Take it to a crossroads or bury it or, wrap it before you put it in the garbage, whatever it is you're going to do. But if you want to make a specialized offering to the gods, bread cannot be beat. It's kind of the core. And you can save a ton of money by baking bread. You absolutely can. Especially if you don't mind sourdough, because sourdough, you don't even have to buy yeast. You catch wild yeast. There are instructions for how to do that online. You can Google them. And like the reason that sourdough is a thing, the reason I say sourdough for catching wild yeast is you also catch bacteria, but if you do it right, you won't get anything that's going to make you sick. But these are things you can do that can help you do offerings and such on the cheap. If you can grow a garden, I highly recommend it. If you can't, no judgment if you can't. But I'm hoping that you guys learned. Yep, I agree with David here. Not drinking is not a requirement for anyone. Nothing wrong with not drinking. 100%. If you're a teetotaler, good for you. Awesome. You're probably saving your nerves some damage. We don't fully understand all of the implications of drinking, but the more we're learning about it, the less our predilections toward the bottle look like a healthy habit. So, saucer of cream and or honey if you like to work with the Fae. I mean, I'm not sure working with is the term that I would personally use when it comes to the Fae, but yeah, if you want to make offerings for those, honey is actually an offering for Helios as well in Hellenism. And honey cakes, again, are traditional offerings for all sorts of different deities within Hellenism. So if you guys are interested, I've been working on looking for a decent camera because I have several historical cookbooks and I'm going to be making vegetarian versions of ancient Greek recipes for offerings and for just enjoying, sort of a modern version of ancient foods. So if you guys are interested, I'll be making gluten-free vegetarian versions. That's going to be coming to the channel sometime in the next year. But if you guys want me to do another stream like this where I talk about food or cooking or, like say a particular kind of food and how to make it, I'd be happy to do something like that. Like it's not the main focus of the channel, but for solo streams, I hope you guys learned something. Let me know down in the comments if you'd be interested in another stream like this. Let me know in the comments if you learned something new or like add some tips that you didn't get a chance to add to the live chat. Make sure that you don't let the video roll over. Drop down in the comments. Help out the algorithm a little bit. Hit the like if you can. MUI, I went over cookbooks a couple times. I've given a few recommendations. Go back and watch the VOD. For any of you that are tuning in for the VOD, thank you so much for watching this. I know it was a little bit rambly, but I tried to stay on topic this time around. Just remember that when it comes to cooking, know what you like, learn what you like, learn how to make the base versions of what you like, and then you can work around things like sales and canned goods and pantry stuff and, like learning how to make things like your favorite takeout and that kind of thing so that you can not only save money, but also there's a certain joy and enjoyment that comes from it. And that's one of the reasons I love to do it. I'm a super taster. I'm picky as fuck. So when I cook my own food, I know that I actually like it. And that's one of my favorite things to do. So, showing off the cookbooks. Yeah. Blood, Sweat, and Steel. Yeah, actually, I just started an Instagram. It's Aliakai SG, spelled the same as the channel with an SG at the end. I've been posting pictures there since last night. If you guys are interested in my cooking exploits, I'll probably talk about the stuff that I make a little more on there. I gave a sort of listing of the stuff that went into my polenta last night for dinner. So if you guys are interested in my cooking exploits, that's actually going to be on the Instagram more often, as well as in the Discord. Links in the description to that, as always. The food modeling agency. I don't usually list off my ingredients and stuff in posts on there, but I do post pictures pretty frequently. So anyway, with that, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us, and well, with me, I guess, but with us, we're a group, right? There's 45 of you. There's been a little over 40 of you since the start of the stream, up to 60 at one point. I hope you guys learned something. Let me know in the comments what you learned. Share any money-saving tips you've got, or like links to your favorite blogs or other things. It might filter your links, but I will be checking the filtered comments to make sure that you guys don't get filtered out. Let me know if there's something you want me to cover on this topic in the future for another solo stream. Tell me you hate my guts. Whatever it is, drop a like or a dislike. Let me know in the comments how you felt. Don't let the video roll over without it. Thank you again for hanging out with me, and remember, we're stronger together.